Okay, evening, blimey, wishful thinking. Been here that long. Morning, ladies and gents. Oh, here he is. Oh, well done. What an entrance. We are live streaming, Chair. We were about to nominate a chair, so good timing.
Right. And just for your information, Steve, I will be leaving for a Zoom meeting at just before 12.
Just wait for Nigel.
We are live streaming. I'd start.
Okay.
Nigel Shaw.
Yeah, we've got those.
Oh, you've got.
Yeah.
Do you need to know
We've got that as well. We've got it all. I'd make a start, Steve.
Yeah.
Live streaming.
Okay, for item 1, declaration of interest, are there any? No. Ah.
Good morning, Chairman.
Okay.
When it comes to the pink papers, I'm item, I'll show declare an interest when that comes forward.
Right. Okay. Good idea. Apologies for absence and substitute.
So we received apologies for absence from Councillor Creamy Gouvenlou, Councillor Murrell, Councillor Shaw, Councillor King and Councillor Bullman, with Councillor Peck as appointed substitute.
Hi, welcome. Great. Item 3, minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 1st of February. Are there true record, first of all? Yes, everyone happy? Matters arising? Anyone? Just to report on two items. There was further clarification at that meeting in terms of the late report that was coming in. The late paper that was going to be put to Cabinet, and further clarification was given there in terms of the money that was being put into reserves or allocated around that issue. Is it all going to come back in terms of business case reviews? So it'll come back to ONS at the right time with those business case reviews, back through the normal process. So that will still be scrutinised. Mm-hmm. And then the other issue was on the, excuse me, the £5 additional in terms of the second occupant in a house. We did have an issue around that in terms of the £5, would it be a burden, etc. At the Cabinet meeting, it was confirmed that the letter would go out and it would clearly point in the letter to the hardship fund, and that if people did have issues, then they could go back to the council in terms of hardship fund to have that £5 covered. And it was also confirmed, and I raised it, that would be put in the letter in a very clear way for, there was 52, I think, that was going to be affected. So the concern was taken on board, which was appropriate. And I think that's it on matters arising. Item, so we move now to, well, I need to change the page actually. So chairman's announcements, none. Public speaking, none. Cabinet reports. Agenda item 12, delivery plan.
So that's not needed because we considered that in February, if you remember, Cabinet.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, of course it did, yeah. Okay, so item 13. Jamie, are you leading on this?
Chair.
Sorry, Sue, could you?
I opened the Cabinet papers and read through them a few days ago. Somebody's just alerted me to the fact the papers they've got today have got 271 pages in, whereas mine had 263. Could somebody just clarify for me what the additional pages are about? Because I don't know where they are.
So the agenda was first sent out Thursday, I believe, and there were some additional pages on there that then got. Ooh. that then got taken out. That was you remember when we talked, remember we talked about the in-year budget in the options and what that would be. It's me, isn't it?
Is it your laptop?
Oh,
Wouldn't be your laptop.
wouldn't be in a laptop, would it? It's my electric personality. Oh, I'll just lean back. So what was... We'll just put that down to me. It's different. So we had the in-year budget savings that Steve just referred to that we're going to be putting business cases through. That was added to the papers this time around in error, so that got removed and that will be coming through, as Steve indicated, in April with the full business cases attached to it. So that's the difference in the numbering. So the 263 pages is the right agenda.
Not the 271.
No. Right. But it'll be fine. I'll talk you through it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it just proves that hopefully Scrutiny's working, isn't it?
Okay, so Jamie, far away.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. So hopefully a relatively straightforward report this morning for you. It's an update on a report previously agreed by Cabinet in June of last year, which talked about the various funding streams we have around COVID and how we intended to deploy them in terms of our COVID recovery. So this report is just a check-in, if you like, in terms of the progress we're making and also an overview of where we are with the funding and what is left and how best to allocate it. So the first section of the report really is just a bit of a celebration, if you like, of the things that the One Team have achieved on behalf of this council and South Norfolk on our COVID recovery plan. I won't dwell particularly on any points, but there's a lot of material in there, a lot of ground covered in terms of the things that we've delivered. Some of the statistics are impressive, and we're very proud of the things that we've achieved since last June. So again, won't cover those in any detail, but happy to cover any of those if colleagues would like me to. The second section of the report talks a little bit about the financial position that we find ourselves in. And broadly speaking, we're looking here at two sources of funding. You'll remember from previous reports, there are a multitude of different funding streams around COVID, but this is looking particularly at the two main ones, if you like. The Containing Outbreak Management Fund, which is funding largely deployed to us via County Council, the public health team at the County Council, and with some directly allocated money from government. And then secondarily, we had a large amount of money allocated to us as a district authority directly from government, which is called the Unring-Fenced COVID Grant. So clues in the title, not specifically for any objective or ring-fenced in any way, but for us to allocate as we see fit in terms of our own organisation and recovery for our district area. So the analysis is contained in a table underneath paragraph 4.5, which shows you largely, we believe that the Containing Outbreak Management Fund is either spent or committed. So we've got until the end of the next financial year to spend all of that money. We've distributed it wisely and across many different service areas, but we believe we'll be spending that money by the end of the next financial year. Obviously, there'll be some tolerances within that, and we'll keep a careful eye as we get through the coming months in terms of where we find ourselves towards the end of the next financial year, but we believe committed or spent. The Unring-Fenced COVID Grant, however, carries with it a sizable underspend. Again, the Unring-Fenced COVID Grant is money that is given to us by government without any particular strings attached. If we don't spend it, we don't lose it. It's just money we can put back in our reserve. So there's no particular pressure around spending that money. So you can see in the table there is a figure of £443,000 that we haven't allocated, committed, or spent as of yet. And then the final section of the report, which is section 5, just takes councillors through 3 areas that we as an officer team feel might be wise to look at allocating some of that underspend to. So the £443,000. So the 3 areas covered there. Councillors will remember that a while back we took the decision to roll out a community connector model in the north part of the district. And that was always with the intention of working alongside our primary care networks, our GP practices in the area, to show them what a fantastic service our Community Connector service could be. And duly, that model has become funded as a social prescribing service by the 2 primary care networks in the north of the district. But that leaves the south of the district without the same coverage. And we know from previous conversations at Cabinet, there was some appetite to look at whether we could roll the service out to the whole of the district area. So one of the suggestions we're looking at here is the deployment of a community connector model up until March 2024, which is the next point at which the social prescribing contract is relet by the NHS for those south areas of our district. Again, with the idea of showing the practices what a great service it is, hoping very much that they'll then commission it from us and provide it through their own funding rather than ours. So that's the first area that we've explored. Again, happy to cover that in more detail if you'd like. The second area, and I'd note that George is sat over in the gallows and can answer any questions on this if you need him to. We've had a great deal of success and still some demand in the system for the local hospitality grants funded by government, but given it's been such a fantastic tool to support some of our hospitality businesses in the district area, there is a suggestion that we could extend that grant with our own reserves and ring-fence COVID grants to the tune of £30,000, which George and the EC growth team feel would be enough to kind of pick up that latent demand in the system. And then the third area is as we are reintroducing, as we are seeing more and more staff come back into the office and re-engaging with their teams, with the wider organisation, we're feeling that it's helpful to maybe look at investing a little bit more in the facilities. You'll remember, and unfortunately, because we just didn't have the demands either at this building or at the headquarters in South Norfolk in Long Stratton, we have seen kind of a dearth of the facilities in those areas, namely the canteens, and a little bit of investment in bringing our facilities back up to speed, bearing in mind that we're still going through the process of considering accommodation on a wider footing. Would be really welcome from a staffing point of view and just help to ease people back into the idea of coming back to the office more regularly. As I say, re-engaging with teams, engaging with customers, with councillors, etc. So that's the third area that we've looked at, investing some of that underspend, and again to the tune of £35,000. So 3 proposals for your contemplation and for Cabinet's contemplation. Chair, that's probably all from me. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, good morning, Jamie. You said the South District Community Connector. Do we have an estimation of how much of the £443,000 that we want to allocate to that, please?
Yes, Councillor Kelly, £175,000 is the amount being requested for that proposal. That's to cover 3 full-time equivalent staff up to the period from June. So if we commence recruitment immediately, we should have people in post by June up until March 2024.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at this 5.8, £35,000 to be spent on tea, coffee facilities, and then the canteen areas, furniture and facilities. It's a lot of money to be spent mostly on furniture, because coffee and tea facilities are, I can't imagine those being very, very costly. Basically, the furniture is there for the people to sit around and have their tea and coffee. Or are you planning to bring in some kind of a cafeteria area where they will be able to sort of like what we used to have, where you could come and sit down and have a meal? Or is it just basically a place to sit, which, I don't know, did we get rid of those tables that were in the canteen? Or why are we buying more furniture when we've already got? And the other thing, of course, is we've got a lot of empty desks upstairs.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, and on the latter point, I think increasingly we find, and I'm sure Emma will chip in on this point if she wants to, and we increasingly find that we don't have a lot of empty desks. More and more staff are gradually coming back into the office and utilising those places. More detail can be provided if that's useful to you, and I can take that point away. But the intention is not to buy furniture. It's about a revamp of the area downstairs, which is just not being used at the moment by any of the staff, with the intention of making it more of a breakout area, somewhere where there are, teas and coffees, nice teas and coffees that are free to staff. And there is a significant, maybe surprisingly significant cost to that as disposable cost. But it's also about making sure the area is fit for purpose and encourages, again, better engagement amongst teams, less teams come in and sit in their own pockets of areas and are isolated from each other. You know, what we'd really like to see is teams re-engaging with each other across teams with the wider organisation. So it's really trying to make best use of that space that is downstairs. And my understanding is, and I'm reaching out here to Emma because she might know a little bit more than me. The intention is, to the largest degree, that and not wanting to open that can of worms right now because it's subject to another process, but if we were to see any moves to any other estate as headquarters, we'd look to take the lion's share of any investment with us. So we're not looking to invest for the sake of staying a few months and moving. If that were the decision that cabinets and councils were inclined to make, we'd look to take as much of it with us as possible. Again, councillor, if more information is required, more information can be provided. This is very much a summary level, I do appreciate.
I'm going to try and hope I don't get feedback. No, just to reconfirm what Jamie said, a lot of it is about having that collaborative space for staff. We've all talked about having it. It's nice to be back in the building. It's nice to have people back in. We've got to get that team ethos back again. We've had 2 years of people working at home. It's very isolating. It's not a nice experience. We want to create some nice space for staff to come in and collaborate, have team meetings, but as Joe said, reach out with other teams and obviously make that space able for them, and it gives them that creative space. Your point, Councillor Nerden, about the furniture around the building, that is being used more and more, and some of it is actually really poor quality and not of great standard people to sit and work at, never mind do anything kind of creative around. So, and as Jamie says, we're not looking to spend money for the sake of it. Again, not wanting to open that particular can of worms, it will be stuff that we can move with us if that is the decision that's taken. So it's not something that we put in and then just leave behind, but it's something that benefits and helps with that staff well-being.
Mine's about the previous thing, and Sue's is about this. Would it be better to...
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Really just want to ask the elephant in the room question. Is there any chance that we could look at providing food? I think one of the things that brings people together is food, providing meals or something that is suitable for lunch times, shall we say.
Well over a year ago, I think what we are doing as part of the offering that Jamie's talking about is having some people would love chocolate, others would like fruit, but having that kind of that snacks available for staff as well. And what staff have done actually over the probably the last year, we've got a lot of people that deliver food into us now, and we've actually helped local businesses through them coming in and delivering food. We've got some really good relationships with Tiffins down the road as an example, and other ones. So they come in and they provide that food for us, and that's working really, really well for staff. If we need to bring food in for meetings, again, we've got a relationship now with Tiffins to be able to do that. And it's nice to be able to offer that something back to the local businesses. So that seems to be working well. As we get more and more people in, we'll obviously look at it and reflect on it. But we all know the canteen made a significant loss when it was, even when we were at full capacity. So we need to be mindful of that and put something in that is proportionate. But we will keep an eye on it and see how things develop over the next few months.
Okay, so well, I'll just come in there.
So just to be clear about this, really we're talking about staff coming back, and in terms of one team concept, people getting together, changing the staff canteen in terms of a sort of meeting area, gathering area,
Space, yeah.
not necessarily for lunch break time.
It's for a mixture of everything to use it for different purposes.
So the nature of the canteen is really changing, hence the figure of this 35,000 for sofas and this sort of thing and seating, I'm guessing.
It is changing that space to make it a much more welcoming space, but to have it to be able to do lots of different things. So sit and eat your lunch, absolutely. Sit and have some roundtable discussions. Use it for a breakout space, a bit of time out, a bit of quiet time. It's what can we do with that space to make it a much more accessible space for everybody.
Okie dokie. And at the moment, can I just ask this question in terms of food? So if staff want food at the moment, you're saying Tiffin's down the road, they pick the phone up and order it, or
We've got, it's not only Tiffin's, we've got 3 or 4 different companies where some of them we've got an arrangement with and you just ring up and pay and they'll come and deliver it. Others, we do it through their app. There's lots of different things that we've got in place for staff, and running alongside that, as we're now getting more people back in, and there may be the evening meetings as we used to have, and we've got a particular arrangement to cover those meeting type food requirements as well.
okay. So I know that at County, Greg, we've not opened up the canteen again, but what has been maintained and reopened is the CAF, which is a smaller facility at County. So you've got basically a rack, and you've got some sandwiches and you've got some toasties there, and the staff numbers are really low. But the idea was that would be more flexible.
What they've got, it's been refurbished anyway, but then on the ground floor, in the middle of the office space, it's all open plan. You've got a cafe, which can also be used as a breakout area. So if people are working, they go and sit and have a coffee and chat and something to eat. And it will initially, that's opening fully, I think, in April, and it will have snacks. So it will have pizzas and stuff like that type of thing. But eventually they hope to open the actual canteen, but that would be
The cafe we've got at the moment.
the little cafe at the moment. Well, it's not a cafe, it's like a little shop really, but they do warm food. They do sort of, you can have a croissant or a pasty or something, but mainly it's snacks. But I think taking your point, I think it's very good for staff to have somewhere like that. And I know when I worked in the States, you'd have a big open plan office, you'd have a Starbucks in one corner and McDonald's in the other corner, and people just drifted in and out of that through the day. It didn't have specific times, and they used it as a workspace. So if they wanted to have a get together of half a dozen staff, they go and sit there.
Much larger
I think
workforce,
it's good for
Greg.
staff morale, actually.
Much larger workforce, Greg, as well. Much larger workforce as well, GM. So back to, okay. Not bad, guess. Who's next? Sue, follow away, Sue.
Yes, thank you. This is about 5.2 actually, the connector service in the GP areas. I just want for a couple of bits of clarification. So you're talking about the south area, which represents 57,000 residents. How many residents do we have altogether? I should know this, I'm sure, but sadly I don't. So the other question I have is, are we sure that the practices where you were talking about possibly putting these, will they welcome this, given that they already have a system in place? And do we have access to be able to go and do this?
Yes is the short answer. The longer version of it is that I think in both South Norfolk and Broadland, we've been really successful about rolling this model of community connection out. And every time we have effectively pump primed it, it's been picked up and funded by the NHS, because we're really proud of the service we provide. And I think whilst the text under 5.2 and 5.3 is quite subtle, I suppose the more candid version of it is that the service currently being offered around social prescribing is very much a telephony-based at-distance service. A lot of the practice that we work with that we don't have a connector service in, because obviously the geographies of the NHS and local government don't quite work. Wherever we work with a practice who has a different provider, they often don't even recognise that they have a social prescribing service. It will be welcome insofar as what the offer we're making to practices is something that they don't currently have, or it's an addition to what they currently have. It will only help them, because one of the big drivers is about trying to make sure that we're picking up social and economic issues that present clinically, but the solution isn't a clinical one. So it will help. This whole model of social prescribing helps with demand on GP services, and it's always been very welcome from that point of view. The test of the model will be when the decision comes to recommission. Is it a service like this that the practice want to recommission, or do they want to stick with what they've got? That's something I can't really comment on. We've been successful in every other area where we've tried this. It may not land this time, but it's there's a degree of risk to it, and come March 2024, there's a decision there if it's not picked up by the NHS as to whether we continue it or see it fall by the wayside.
Yeah, thank you for that. I absolutely agree. I think it's a really good service. I was just interested to know whether you had explored whether GPs practices would be willing to take this in now, because I think you're right. Once they have it, they will probably recognise that it's of great value.
I think the other thing I'd add, Councillor, is we see a great deal of value from this service. This isn't an entirely altruistic move. The ethos that the council has had for a number of years, which we've built upon through COVID and still continue to build upon, is one of prevention. We tend to find that a lot of the cases we pick up, I noticed Richard just sneaked in the room at the back, who looks after our housing and benefits services. One of the reasons we have a more manageable caseload of housing cases and homelessness and almost a complete lack of rough sleeping is because we're able to pick up some of those socioeconomic factors that people are experiencing way downstream before they think about engaging with us as a council, rather engaging with the NHS. So, this is about building on our help hub model as well as it is about supporting the NHS with its unmanageable levels of demand.
I absolutely agree with all that, and I understand all that. But my question is, have you tested this or checked with any GP services to see whether they would be willing to take this in now as a?
Yes, we have. They will welcome the service. The question I can't answer is whether they will commission it come March 24. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very much support the whole concept of community connectors. But just following on from that, basically we're having to sell the idea such that we can then secure funding going forward. And it would be awful if, it was a success, but the funding wasn't available. So what are we doing in terms of providing the evidence to say that it is successful? And, how is that monitoring framework looking?
Excellent question. I mean, it's a well-developed, mature model, if you like, because we have. So to give you an idea of scale of numbers, 4 years ago, when I worked solely for South Norfolk, we had, I think it was 4 connectors. Now across the one team, we have 24 connectors, and we've grown it quite rapidly through exactly what you're suggesting is both qualitative and quantitative analysis of how successful the model is. So obviously, it's easy to track referrals, but it's also then tracking those referrals through to where they go next in the system, the connections we make to other VCSE organisations, into our own service areas. There's some degree of those connectors holding cases themselves, 2, 3, 4 appointments that may see somebody kind of work through some of their issues. And the qualitative feedback is always exceptional, both from the patients, the residents themselves, but also from the GP practices in which the service is based. So we pick up all angles.
Thank you, Chair. Jamie, I had a report back, I think it was November, December time in Aylsham, suggesting that there was no social prescriber that could be referred to through the GP surgery. I'm wondering if you know if that's now possible, and if so, how? Thanks.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and by looking at the picture and say that Aylsham is one of the surgeries that we don't currently cover. We as a council. So Aylsham would be one of the services. I believe we currently cover and hold the contract for NN1 and NN2. So if you're looking at the picture slightly above paragraph 5.2, the northern 2 primary care networks are the ones that we currently cover. The southern practices, the southern 2 primary care networks are the ones that we don't. So we'd be looking at putting in place a service that would cover Aylsham along with its neighbouring practices. So in some respects, your feedback is testament to the model that we're trying to bring up to standard.
Thanks. So are you saying that there at the moment isn't a provision? And is this one of the areas that would become serviced by this scheme?
Yes, I am. Yeah. So there is a provision in place. It's delivered via the voluntary sector, not by us. I'm saying that this money would enable us to cover the practices in NN3 and NN4, of which I think Aylsham is one, looking at the picture, which would bring the service level up to our standards of service.
Thank you.
And Jamie, I think we did have some clarification on this, because Sue's right, we did have this raised by the town council, but the email that I believe that we received back was saying exactly what you're saying now, that we've got the voluntary sector and then plus you're going to just make an absolute, I think what Sue's doing, just making absolutely sure that is where we are, but I'm pretty sure I saw an email to that effect. So just timeline on this, Jamie, particularly for Aylsham, it's only covered by the voluntary part at the moment.
Pending decision from Cabinet, we'd look to recruit at pace. So that the funding is there to cover from June onwards, but it's down to how the market reacts. We've never traditionally struggled to recruit to these sorts of roles because they're quite exciting roles for a lot of different reasons.
Okay.
But it's down to the market.
So if the recruitment goes ahead in June, if it's successful, you'd be looking to roll it out July, August?
No, Chair. We'd start recruitment as soon as the decision is taken, so next week. And it would give us a couple of months running to recruit. So again, depends what the market has to throw at us.
So your recruitment, what I'm saying is presumption, because you mentioned June about recruitment. So if the recruitment's completed by June, would you then roll out July, August over them couple of months?
Yeah, over June, July. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks. Okie dokie. Anyone else? Oh, Sue.
Sorry, just
Again.
would like to ask for clarity. So under 5.2, where it mentions the suburbs, is that where the priority is, and will Aylsham come after that, or is Aylsham in the first flush?
I think that the idea here is to have universal coverage of all practices in our district area. We wouldn't roll out to some ahead of others. We'd just look to roll out. We're only talking 3 members of staff here, so we try and do it all in one wave.
Yeah. Okay. Sue, you haven't spoken yet, so I'll let you in first, and then Sue.
As I understand it, the peripheral parishes, the North Norwich ones, we are in some sort of informal link with Norwich City Council, with the citizens' advice and that sort of thing, until that conglomeration comes to an end in 2024. So we've got 2 layers. We've got the NN3 and NN4, which we're just talking about recruiting for this summer. But the people such as my group of parishes, we are in the clutches of Norwich City Council and others until even later. Is that correct, Jamie? So we've got 2 layers, as it were.
Yeah, and effectively, us rolling out this connector service would mean we'd have both working in tandem.
Yeah, fine.
So again, an enhanced service to the residents in those
but at the moment, we have something in the North Norwich area, but not as satisfactory as the service that we would like to give, because our GPs don't really know very much about it. Thank you.
Sue H was on the same point.
Well, yes, it was actually.
I thought it was actually.
Yeah, it was just to say that NN3 and NN4 have been agreed already, haven't they? We're now just talking about the bits and the urban areas.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just before we move to these recommendations, just one point Scrutiny should be doing here, James, as well. Page 105 again, and 6.1 primary risk associated. So what the implication here is that we're spending this COVID money. There's a primary risk, which could be another COVID outbreak. Then goes on about the science, and then says further outbreak, However, an increase in infections has been identified as a significant risk by the government's scientific advisors. In this situation, in this unfortunate situation, hopefully it doesn't occur, that we do have another outbreak with another variant, and who knows what that variant would be like. And we've spent this money. Where would we be? Because there is a risk just being flagged up. And I think unless we need to just focus in on that a bit for Cabinet. And where do you think government would be in terms of their view about that? Would they have said, well, you should have ring fenced this because this was this is a long-term risk?
Excellent question.
Thank you.
I suppose if I think back to the different phases we've had of COVID, they've become increasingly less resource intensive in terms of what we've needed to do to help manage the situation. So thinking back to March 2020, it was an all hands on deck effort, massive redeployment, many services affected as a consequence, people needing to do what was necessary to get us through a really unfamiliar set of circumstances. Subsequent lockdowns have not seen that same level of need and demand, consequently not seen the same level of demand upon our service areas. One of the biggest chunks of resource that we have at our disposal throughout the pandemic has been the COVID support advisors. So we've had funding for around 20 full-time equivalents. We've had a variable level, but it's always been in and around that number. I think we're about 16, 15 at the moment. We've got those in place until the end of June, having extended their contracts, and that's within the budgets we're talking about. In reality, we've not seen for some months a level of work that has necessitated them to work full-time on COVID-related work. So typically, the biggest chunks of work are when the case levels go up, isolation is required by governments. We do a lot of contact tracing work to support the county-wide model. Government have made it no longer a legal obligation to isolate. So I can't see, unless they reversed back on that legislation, we'd ever need to get into that level of work again. The other area is more on our regulatory side, where we've put in place a lot of support and a lot of visibility in town centres, market towns, on the high street, in terms of the businesses requiring customers to behave in certain ways, wear masks, use sanitation points, look at signage, that type of thing. Again, the government has really rowed back from the requirements around any of those things. None of it is a legal obligation anymore. It's really difficult, Chair. I can never say never, because we just don't know, but it's really difficult to see that the level of need would ever escalate to what we've seen in the recent past. I would also say that I think what that means to me is that the risk is a very low one, although you can never say it's never going to be there. I would also say that we've always acted really fluidly in any circumstance thrown at us as a council, and I don't see that would not be the case in any future scenario. So we would always find a way to make sure that we're able to support our residents and businesses in the right way pertaining to the circumstances that they find themselves in. I know that's a vague answer, but I think our track record kind of backs that judgment up, I feel. Chair, I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Sorry, it's as I said, it's identified as 6.1 as a risk because the money was, paid in, or given over to Broadland for this reason, and other councils, obviously. And I guess what the risk is really, if we spend this money, then you have another horrendous outbreak. If that was to occur, you don't know, of course. A new variant, who knows? I mean, this latest variant, I watched the news last night, and shrinking people's brains. I mean, this is some awful viruses that we've been encountering here. Who knows? At that point, picking up on your point, Jamie, about we would engage and we would do, we'd put in the necessary measures to support. At that point, that would mean going back into an unbudgeted situation that wasn't budgeted for at all. So we would then be requiring, almost an emergency way, Cabinet to be looking at reserves to see this through. So it is actually worth a point making, because we need to, as Scrutiny.
Chairman, the other point I'd make is anecdotal feedback would suggest that no other councils, or very few other councils, either in Norfolk or across the country, are sitting on an underspend of COVID money. So we've been frugal in the way that we've managed our resources. If the government required more of the local government sector, it is very, very unlikely they'd do that without making new burdens funding available to deploy any obligation. Yeah. I can't see how the sector would cope with another wave and another requirement of investment of its time and attention on things outside of what it's funded to do currently.
Okay. I mean, this is what we've got to do, Jamie, isn't it? We just keep, and then the answers keep coming. So, new burdens. Okie dokie. So I think that based upon that, Jamie, I think that really we just need a minute to cover this, because it's 6.1 should be noted in the minute, and then the exchange that's happened. The risk that's pointed out in 6.1 I think we need a minute on the exchange of that. Particularly last point you made around, you'd expect a new burdens relief to come in that situation, and that overviewing scrutiny, certainly the chair raised this issue. I think we just need to minute that accordingly. It's not a recommendation from us in any way, shape or form, but just recognising there's risk here. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do for overviewing scrutiny on this. Would we all agree with that on the minute? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so everybody, should we move on now to the recommendations? Yes. Now that's, shall I read it out, Ken? That'd be helpful. Shall I read the recommendation out, or can you see it? Okay. So I'll read it out. So it's 8, and we've got 1, and then we've got 2. To note the progress made against the COVID recovery plan, endorsed by Cabinet in June 2021, to agree to the deployment of the unring-fenced COVID grant to fund options presented in Section 5. Somebody proposing, yes, Ken? Okie dokie. Guess there's a seconder. Yes, there's a seconder. All those in favour?
Looks unanimous.
Yes, that is. I concur. Okay, okie dokie. Right, move to our next item, which is agenda item 14, page 107. And yeah, I know what you mean. Those tablets are still the bane of my life as well, Ken. And I know that I just said that for Emma's benefit, but there you go. Richard. So Richard, welcome, and Victoria, and fire away, please.
Morning, everyone. So we're presenting this morning the South Norfolk and Broadland Rough Sleeper Strategy. So this is a sister document to the Greater Norwich Homelessness Strategy, which was published in 2020. So as part of the development of the strategy, we were able to undertake a review of our rough sleeper cohort. So that's people coming through our rough sleeper service since about August 2019. And we were able to look at the cohort of people coming through, what the needs are and where the demand is coming from. So this was really timely because it also enabled us to input that information into our rough sleeping initiative bid, which has just gone in, and that will give us 3 years worth of extra funding to continue the rough sleeper team if we're successful, fingers crossed. So in terms of the development of the strategy, we have created a vision to eliminate rough sleeping in South Norfolk and Broadland, and this very much aligns with the direction by central government in their current rough sleeper strategy to end rough sleeping. And from that strategy and from our own review, we have created 4 strategic aims. So they're around prevention of rough sleeping, and I think that's probably the most important one because we want to stop it happening in the first place. Intervening in those very small numbers of cases where it does happen. So just to give an example, we currently have no rough sleepers in Broadland at the moment. Making sure that what interventions we do make or the prevention that we make, it's long lasting and it's positive for that person and that there's no risk of crisis from reoccurring. And then making sure that our systems are all joined up so we're all working together. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, my question actually is I noticed there was quite a discrepancy of figures or between Broadland and South Norfolk, and I wondered if there were any identifiable reason for that or something you might suggest why those differences were.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a slightly higher number in South Norfolk, and the sort of the reasons we can think for that, you might agree with me, Richard, or come back to me if you don't, is we have sort of areas in South Norfolk such as this, which is a bit further away from Norwich. So because it's a slightly more urban area, you might get a bigger sort of cohort there, whereas in Broadland, you might have more people sort of gravitating towards Norwich.
And to add to that, just main part being this is it's the first stop on the train from Norwich. And also, this doesn't account for the discrepancy. Both districts allow people to hide if they do not want to be found. There's plenty of space in our districts where they can kind of bed down in the woods, in a tent and things like that. It's hard to find people. That's why it's really important to have a rough sleep initiative. But it's transient. One year you may have more in Broadland, one year it may be more in South Norfolk. But I would have to say the train stopping at this does cause problems for the South Norfolk team.
So just to be clear, it's about the fact that these are two urban areas, and obviously Norwich is considerably bigger and more attractive. And you think this is the rail brings them in? So it's a stop on the line?
It's either a stop on the line or a stop when they leave Norwich. Yeah, so it's their first. So if you can only afford a limited ticket, you can afford to get to this, but you can't afford to get any further.
And so, I mean, there's a number of categories in there, rough sleepers and where they originate from. So you can have migrating rough sleepers that are kind of in the region, migrating in or migrating out, but you can also have rough sleepers through circumstance directly as ex-residents of Broadland or of South Norfolk that become rough sleepers. There's these two sort of categories of people, and I think identification, one of the things I was trying to go through the report on was to see if there was more of a kind of understanding of that different level, that different breakdown between arrivals and people that actually found themselves in circumstance that meant, you know, they were homegrown, if you like. They were residents of Broadland or South Norfolk.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we found in the review is I think the majority of people that were reported as rough sleeping in South Norfolk and Broadland were from South Norfolk and Broadland. Yeah. I think there's very low numbers. I think there was a couple from Norwich, one from another Norfolk district, and then a very small number of actual out of area. I suppose we do talk about Norwich because sometimes, you know, you do get people, you know, people who are rough sleeping, they don't sort of take any account of district borders. And Norwich can also be seen as a destination place because that's where you get some visibility and where a lot of the services are. We have really good relationships with the Pathways team in Norwich. So if we get reports of people rough sleeping in Norwich, then they contact us and then we make contact with that person. So that will also be included in the figures and separated out to South Norfolk and Broadland as well.
Yeah, so the vast majority are people that find themselves. Thank you. That's really helpful. So,
thank you, Chair. I think my question is about the definition, because it specifically said in the report that these figures don't include sofa surfers, but the idea that somebody who is sofa surfing has a home doesn't add up to me. If the householder is not wishing those people to stay with them, then they're in effect homeless. So I'm not quite sure where the overlap goes between this and those people who, but for the grace of somebody, are actually homeless.
So the rough sleeper strategy and the rough sleeper team is merely just a piece of a puzzle for a whole housing team. So the people you've just been talking about would be receiving a full service from our homelessness service. They're sofa surfing, so in many ways they are homeless, but at home, even though it's not their home. But it's the assessment on whether they are entitled to temporary accommodation. So someone who is sofa surfing, we say to them, have you got somewhere where you can stay, friends or family to be able to stay? Yes, I have. I can stay around my friends. I can sofa surf for that period of time. During that period, we're doing a full homelessness assessment to see if they need accommodation longer term. So the rough sleeping is merely, have they had to sleep on the streets? And if so, do they need immediate accommodation? Okay, they still, no matter what their circumstances, receive a full homelessness service. When you're in rough sleeper, and when you're in the rough sleeper cohort, just because you're in the rough sleeper accommodation, you are still receiving a full homelessness service from the housing team. We're just doing it in cohesion with the rough sleeper service. The rough sleeper service also, a lot of people who can sofa surf, their lives are, there's nowhere to say that they're not chaotic, but there is some structure to their life. As soon as you're in rough sleeping, there is no structure. You've absolutely, you're at the will of even the weather, aren't you? So that's where the rough sleeper team can provide that more rounded, holistic support. Obviously, there's on many occasions substance misuse, mental health problems as well within there. So that's why you have a rough sleeper team to be able to really focus that support. But don't worry, we sofa surfers we take very seriously as well. It's just they fall within a very slightly different legal criteria.
Years and years and years ago, there was a focus on rough sleeping, so therefore people were getting left on the street. So the whole team network and what's been set up over the last, well, decade and a half, really, particularly around that, it's focused in on that, because if you're sofa surfing, at least there's a roof over your head and heat and presumably some capacity going on, you know. I'm going to come back on this on the report, but I'll let who's next? No, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for answering a question I was asked at a parish council meeting recently, which was, you know, how many rough sleepers do we have in Broadland? But we also made the point that actually, and I think you made it as well in the report, that those from Broadland can also gravitate to Norwich. So just to clarify, have we got? Do we have any rough sleepers who are currently sort of migrated to Norwich? Do we know?
That's a really good question. So I spoke to our rough sleeper coordinator this morning because I wanted to get sort of an up-to-date number. He definitely said there were 0 rough sleepers in Norfolk, and normally he would have said that if they were working with someone in Norwich or in another district that had a Broadland connection, then he would have said that they were doing some work on that, but he didn't. So I can assume that we haven't got any at the moment.
What I can assure you is the minute that they realise that it is a Broadland or South Norfolk resident, they are on the phone to us to see if we can resolve the situation.
Okay. So if I can just follow up. So, and again, for clarification, is there any kind of, and I don't know what might affect it in terms of finance, the economy, seasons and so on, variation throughout the year? Have you seen a pattern of that kind?
Certainly. So when we did our first rough sleeper audit a couple of years ago, when we did our first rough sleeper initiative bid, I think it's sort of fairly obvious, but we had a lot more people reporting to us in the winter because it's colder, so people are less likely to want to sleep out. I would say as a result of COVID, I think it's probably sort of stabilised over the whole year. Would you agree? So yeah, there isn't sort of a pattern. It's just because there are more people at risk of homelessness, so we've got more people coming to us throughout.
And to just build on that result of COVID is we helped an unbelievable amount of people through everybody in. And what I then did is we utilised the social sector and supported sector to be able to give them longer term accommodation. So I thought, this is great. We've got a captive audience. They're locked down. They can't go anywhere. Let's utilise this time to get the throughput through the system to direct let them properties, or direct let people in supported accommodation to ensure the throughput, so we could then get them straight into accommodation. So we helped a no end amount of people during that time, which means that these transient people who sometimes go in and out of sofa surfing, they're in long-term accommodation now, which is absolutely wonderful.
So that's a real good demonstration then of continuing with that policy of actually providing that accommodation. Absolutely. Okay, let's hope it continues in that way. Thank you.
Anyone else? Greg.
Yeah, thank you. You said that there are people who don't want to be found, or they can be hidden. What sort of lengths do you go to try and locate those people, or do we just ignore them? And I am aware that there are people who live on the street who would prefer to live on the street, because there are stories of people being taken off the street and put in nice accommodation. They're back on the street in a few weeks because it's a lifestyle they enjoy. There's not many of them, but I mean, I believe there's one lady in Norwich who she's been given accommodation, but she still goes back on the streets. So, and obviously that's probably leading towards mental health issues. I don't know, but maybe not, because the one that I was aware of, who's more in the countryside, was an ex-military chap, and it was his chosen lifestyle. He enjoyed it. He didn't want to live in a house, So I just wonder what sort of lengths your team go to try and locate those sort of people, and what if anything, can you do to persuade them to move into accommodation?
So we do an annual count each year. And one way in which we count, because we don't walk around the whole of the district, that would be pretty impossible for our coordinators. So we link straight in with our parish councils network. If there is a rough sleeper out there or someone bedding down wherever, a dog walker normally finds them, or there's an evidence out there, then that goes straight to normally their parish council or an email through to our rough sleeper team. So we find them. There's no doubt we will find them, and I encourage anyone to report them through. Once we've found them, we can't drag them in kicking and screaming, and we can't, in effect, imprison them. It's free for them to come and go. However, what doesn't change is the support that we can give them during that time. We will be that safety net. So once we know about them, we will go and visit them frequently to make sure that they have the things that they need. Often the weather is the thing that pushes them to us. So we just need to make sure that our offer is known to them. So when it gets particularly cold, they then come to us, we then accommodate them, and then make sure it's as comfortable for them as possible, so they don't disappear again. So we've got that captive audience to be able to support them into that longer term accommodation that they need. What we also do is often when we can't encourage someone to come through, there's normally a number of other partner agencies who are involved in that person. So we always set up a multi-agency meeting with everybody involved. Everybody's normally encouraging him or her to come to our accommodation, and then we make sure that that support is in place once they do, or even if they don't. Yeah, there was a lady near the airport that's taken about 6 to 9 months, I think, to resolve. She's accommodated now, and that's just perseverance, really.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. Our policy strategy when it comes to illegals that are rough sleeping, migrants, refugees, do we assist, or do we accommodate, or do we push them on to other agencies to deal with? Do they become our problem? I might have missed that somewhere, but it's just a question.
So we work closely with the people from a board team in Norfolk County Council. Simon Shreve is our main point of contact. Sometimes it depends. The problem we have is our model of providing accommodation does rely on benefits, and the biggest hurdle can be making sure that they have recourse to public funds. So whilst we can continue to support them out in the community, it does sometimes cause problems of providing an accommodation. We have on occasions, however, we have to be careful on the budget because we have limited spot purchasing budget within our bid, and if that's all utilised on a couple of people, then there isn't the available resilience for others. So far, this hasn't been a problem because we haven't had that many, and the numbers that we have been able to soak up in the budget. Okay, if it was a problem, I would have put it in the bid as a spot purchasing increase to deal with no recourse to public funds individuals.
It may not be relevant, Chairman, but if we were in a position where we were the Ukrainian people were involved, would we be able to consider pushing, giving them other contacts?
I think, obviously you can answer that, but at the moment, as I understand, the government is setting up refugee status for, might be slow, and I think we'd all agree on that. Seems to be bureaucratically cumbersome, to say the least. But that status gives them a whole set of rights that asylum seekers are in a different category to, and therefore you get direct visas coming in. So therefore they would be friends, family, accommodated, etc. Would this be the kind of
this is very, as you all know, it's hot off the press, and and we are waiting for government guidance. The way in which we deal with asylum seekers is slightly different. Yeah. So the work that we've done with the Afghanistan asylum seekers, and before that the Syrian asylum seekers, that provides a certain model. The government hasn't provided any detail regarding Ukraine at the moment. Victoria and I are currently working on a CMLT paper, so I don't want to overstep the mark in any recommendations yet until it's been considered by senior officers. But once that's gone through CMLT, that will be going through the governance process if there's any costs incurred to us to be able to explain what our rough offer will be. The time frame, we're at the moment, all we're doing is working with the people from the board team to work out appetite for us and potential cost to the council, because there will be a cost, and therefore we need to consider. Of course, we all want to help everybody, but we have to just make sure that's balanced. And as I said before, it's not my money, it's residents' money, and you're here to represent the residents, so that would come through the main governance process.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, just coming back on a couple of points that have been raised. When you go through the stats, I mean, it's a point that Greg's raised there about some people like to continue to sleep rough. I think that was the point you mentioned, or words similar to that. And you do have repeats. There's 17% here, so we're looking at some facts. However, when you look at the stats in terms of capacity, mental health, quite high. Alcohol, drug issues, which be driven through circumstance, mental breakdown, whatever. So we're talking about capacity here. And I don't think I've actually come across a rough sleeper in London or here that actually likes it. There's a capacity issue which is driving them, and they therefore cannot keep themselves into a position where they are paying now their benefit on a rent through sheltered accommodation. They just slip back out of it again through capacity. Therefore, all the services that are joined up on this, through St Martin's, through YMCA, through supported housing, etc., to get into a standard for council housing, all these services rely upon other services, and including the mental health situation at the moment. I mean, I'm only too aware of doing some work in this sort of sector that, you know, you can have a person, they go into some sort of issue, ambulances are called in terms of mental capacity, they take them into accident emergency, and there's not a lot they can do, and they're put back out on the street within 24 hours. Now, what can you do in that situation? So this is not an easy choice thing by people. This is what's happening. And part of the issue that I've seen, and it might not be popular to say this outside or whatever, is that there is clearly a lack of sustained mental health support and funding from the government that enables authorities like ours who want to do the right thing, is doing the right thing in terms of joined up thinking, through to the city as well, and other local authorities, in terms of really cracking this nut in terms of people and their long-term support. Happens in other countries, but there's been a long-term systemic problem going on here. And the workers involved in this, Hells and wherever, they all say the same thing. So I understand the report. I think it's a good report, by the way. There's a lot of work going on, but I think also from my own personal point of view, recognise that part of it, the mental health support part, and what happens to people and why they get back out of housing, is not really there, and there's limited that councils can do, because you need more government support in that.
Do you mind if I come back?
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. Mental health services are notoriously difficult to get hold of and to provide the support we need. The only reason I want to come back though is because there's real encouragement out there at the moment. We're working. I'm in meetings at the moment where there's 7, 8 floating heads on the screen, and all of them have got NSFT after them. Yeah. I have, over all my tenure in housing, struggled to get anybody in a meeting from NSFT, and now there's a real will out there. Now, I don't think that will be necessarily from the picking people up off the streets and giving them support point of view. What it will be is from a prevention point of view. So when someone is discharged from a mental health service, we're going to have a rehab team, which is a brand new, newly created additional resource team. So it's not just mental health services picking a couple of officers out of their current team and leaving another resource scarce. It's brand new staff which are being brought together to be able to help people who are discharged from mental health into accommodation, provided support in the community. That means that discharge is being, the throughput through the mental health services is quicker, which means hopefully we can get access to that mental health services because there'll be spaces. And there's less chance of those failing once they're put into accommodation because they've got that rehab support. I'm really excited about it. They're currently recruiting their senior management within that work, and the Greater Norwich area is being used as a pilot for the whole of Norfolk. No, there isn't, because it's, again, pretty much hot off the press and it's been done in the last couple of weeks. What I intend to do with that work, once we get to a more final point, is be able to go through the wellbeing panel to make sure the members are fully updated.
Okay, and also could you update the ONS committee as well on that, because it's something that in terms of overview we should have knowledge of and insight, and it helps councillors in terms of their own wards as well. So if there isn't a report, Emma, going through to Cabinet on this in terms of the initiative that's the rehab team, if there isn't a report going through to Cabinet because there's no actions, what I'd still like to see is if you're giving an update report simply on information to wellbeing, could you also give one to ONS as well, please?
Okay, I'll, as always, take Emma's lead on that.
So as this is hot off the press, it's a little bit difficult to let you know, but I'll pick up with Richard what it is that's going through to wellbeing. What going through to wellbeing should be a decision to Cabinet, so you should receive that through ONS. But I'll pick that up with him and make sure that that gets covered off in the right way.
Okay, and my only point, Emma, was if there wasn't anything coming forward for a decision through to Cabinet, then we'd just like an update on it anyway.
If there's an update, we'd share it with all members anyway, Steve, absolutely.
Yep.
Natasha?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to hear about your latest plan. I fully agree with everything you've just said, Councillor Riley, about mental health issues. But just to add to that, as someone who previously worked 10 years in a homeless hostel, as I did, and doing outreach work, one of the other really significant issues I found was care leavers and people with substance misuse and sex workers and the like. And also now what I'm seeing is a lot of issues of people who have additional needs that aren't mental health, such as learning difficulties and the like, people, on the autistic spectrum who are really struggling to live an atypical kind of lifestyle. Are they being included? I understand there should be a focus on mental health because it is a huge, huge problem. But for the people who don't fit into mental health issues, they tend to get left out a bit sometimes because they don't have a diagnosis. Is there any way to make sure those kind of people are included because they just don't fit into your normal schemes?
So the care leavers work, we work really. I feel we've filled in that gap because I personally attend meetings with social services. They're called PPM, which is, I never know what the acronym stands for, but it's their move on from care leavers, and to make sure that they've got a stable home and a suitable home for them to move on to. Learning development side is another work stream which is incredibly in its infancy, as in we're only just started to talk about it with senior officers, and I'm not going to go down another rabbit hole and give any details about that right now, but I will, but as soon as we've got more delivery, I'm happy to update.
This could go on a long time.
So we move to the recommendation, which I think is a simple one. Cabinet to approve adoption of South Norfolk Broadland Rough Sleeping Strategy 2020-2025. Okay.
The report refers to 2022, 2025.
but this recommendation is 2020
Yeah,
to 2025.
I know.
So I think that needs to be corrected.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, that's a typo. Apologies. I'll correct it.
No, you're right. You're right. So we've got a proposer. I think you just proposed that. Sue's just seconded it. Yes. All those in favour? Yes, unanimous. And the hub is good news, by the way. As I said, if there is information and not a report on our work programme, we're still entitled to see an update on that. So I think we'd agree with that as well. Yeah, I hope you do. Thanks very much. Take care. It's now 11:20, so probably exactly the right time to take a 10-minute break, and then we should be able to finish after that. To conservation, God, area, not enough, obviously. An adoption of conservation area appraisal, page 144. And Chris Bennett, welcome. And have I seen you here before? I don't think so. No, I thought it was the first time. Well, welcome. And nobody bites here, so fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this is for the adoption of the conservation area appraisal and the extension of the conservation area. If you look at page 153 in Appendix A, you can see that most of the conservation area is actually in the Broads Authority, Planning Authority, but the extension is going to be in our authority, hence why come to committee. It is the duty of the local authority from time to time to review their area and designate any conservation areas of places of architectural and historic interest, and to also set out management and enhancement proposals to ensure that they're being enhanced. So it's from time to time. So the job is fallen to the Broads Authority, as most of the areas within their jurisdiction, to do that assessment. And they've already adopted it at their committee. They've taken it through the consultation process. And then it's come to us to just adopt this small area. Their consultation process was quite extensive, involving leaflets to all the houses, also direct letters to the properties which were going to be assigned local list status and also affected by Article 4s. The property in our area is going to be locally listed, but it's not going to be subject to any of the Article 4 directions. It's already been to placemaking panel, who had a couple of questions regarding solar panel and the Article 4 direction. And as I said in report, it's really there. It doesn't actually affect the property within our district, but it does affect some of the properties in the Broads Authority. And it's sort of there to ensure that if there are any solar panels, etc., that consideration is taken in terms of the conservation area character and its appearance. But it doesn't necessarily say that you can't put solar panels up. It's quite often the case you can find a sort of discrete roof slope, etc. So it's really there as a way of doing that. So I think if there are any questions.
If I can just say that I fully support this, and I just wish you could make the area bigger, actually, because I know Beelo, it's a lovely place, and it needs to be protected. It's beautiful, and the issue regarding solar farms. Are you telling me that they can still put a solar park up in a conservation area?
No, this is directly relating to houses and planning permission. You
planning
have a permitted development right for a house.
But it doesn't protect it from other development.
Well, I think all consideration of solar farms, firstly, you've got the open countryside policies if it's outside the settlement boundary. And also you've got the consideration of the setting of the conservation area. And particularly in this area being the Broads Authority and the landscape of the river, you'd be taking into consideration how solar farm would impact upon that in terms of any harms, how it's viewed. I think because this is a highly sensitive area, it's unlikely those sort of developments are proposed close to this.
Okay, well, I fully support it, but I just wish that some of the rules regarding conservation areas could be a bit tougher, actually, so that people can't damage the environment like that. But thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, Chris. I noticed that a lot of the impact of the questions were all about solar panels. But we've got a lot of, government legislation and looking for, make homes sort of more environmentally friendly. But there's no mention of technology of heat pumps in that lot. So would they fall under the ideal of the Broads Authority's vision for this conservation with the same as solar panels?
But I think again, it's if it's required to have planning permission, which I think in some air source heat pumps, if it's close to a neighbouring property, does require planning permission. I don't know the ins and outs of the exact requirements, but when the planning officer is looking at that, assessing that, they're taking into account the conservation area and the characters in the conservation area. If try and locate it in a position where it isn't obvious, or ways to mitigate the harm. In terms of like putting it in a cover or something so it doesn't distract from the property. But it's probably more of an issue with listed buildings than it is in the conservation area.
Just for me, actually. The consultation, the Article 4, item involvement in Article 4 some years ago, actually, and residents didn't support it, and came back to our planning committee, and the planning committee didn't support it either. Partly at that point in time, this is the point I'm getting to, because changes had already been made in that particular location. So residents were saying, well, hold on a minute, made these changes, but nobody else will be able to make these changes in the future. And you might have a house right next to another house that's made changes. So it's coming in now. In terms of consultation, how many people responded to that consultation? I'm just trying to
I think it's, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs because I didn't actually sort of do the consultation,
Okay.
but it is a sort of, it's all contained in Appendix B.
7.
Yeah. Now, I know the property within our area, they didn't respond. But as I said, they weren't subject to the Article 4s anyway. It's just the extension of the area.
And the just picking up on the point that the panels made here as well, around the solar panels, the point Greg's made, as far as I'm aware, this wouldn't necessarily preclude, say, a solar farm, because it has to come back through to planning anyway. It's down to planning committee in terms of the arguments that come forth at that point about setting, etc., etc., etc. The issue about solar panels on roofs, understand that this also means that plan application would have to be made if you want to put solar panels on your roof. And then you're looking at, I'm looking at page 181 at the moment. There's not the intent to stop the use of solar panels, but to ensure that consent is required so they can be positioned sympathetically and to protect views from the river. So in a situation where south-facing, slightly southeast, west, which was you need for solar panels, if that is actually overlooking the river, for instance, that could be an issue. So you could have planning consent turned down on that basis.
Yes, I mean, obviously it would be up to the Broads Authority to decide, but I mean, it is there to protect those views of the river, and that's quite important landscape and the character. But I think the heritage officer always, we're very conscious of sustainability and all the air source heat pumps and everything, and trying to find ways to actually do things, and try and suggest different ways of doing things as well. If solar panels aren't ideal in that location, then suggesting different ways of meeting those energy efficiency requirements. It's quite difficult because the 10 years ago, we might have just said, no, you can't have anything. But now there's so much emphasis on trying to be sustainable that sort of conservation's moved with the times a bit, and we're a bit more flexible now than we were 10 years ago, and trying to find ways of, improving the energy efficiency of historic buildings, because they are quite poor in that respect.
Okie dokie. Is there anyone else before we move on? Okie dokie. Just one other point. I noticed on the consultation that I've lost my page now, actually. that there was supposed to be a public consultation of parish council meeting, but that didn't take place over COVID. Okay. I'm probably going to stay on this anyway. So I need. I'm not. So I can't propose it. Who's proposing recommendation? Here we go. Only recommendation. Cabinet recommends the council to approve the adoption of the proposed extension boundary bird conservation area. Got it right that time, yeah. To include Pipers, hay, and its curtilage. Appendix A. 2, the Cabinet recommends the Council to approve the adoption of conservation area appraisal of conservation area, Appendix C. These are proposed for the, yes. Second, yes. All those in favour?
10.
Any against? One abstention. Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks very much. You're welcome back anytime. Item 16, page 193. Where's Ken? Is he on? All right. Okay. Well, write that down for him, Greg. 193. Community infrastructure fund application, Brundall Parish Council, and it's George Denton, not Emily Larter. I recognise the difference. Please, far away, George.
Good morning,
Welcome,
everyone.
by the way.
So the purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet approval for a loan to Brundall Parish Council. This is to use the existing community infrastructure loan function that we have in Broadland District Council. The Parish Council have an ambition to deliver a multi-sport floodlit 3G pitch even, and a community building. Cabinet approval is needed to offer a £231,318.85 loan to Brundall Parish Council for this sports hub. To facilitate this, the existing SIF loan pot needs to be increased by £150,000. We're proposing a permanent increase to the earmarked reserves used to create the existing £500,000 fund, taking the new total of the fund to £650,000. Appendix 1 of the report outlines the deliverables and benefits of the proposed scheme, and the structure of the community infrastructure loan schemes means there's very limited risk to Broadland District Council. I'd refer you all to recommendations on page 196, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Far away. Sorry. Any questions or clarity? I understand you had an interest. Ken, you mentioned? No, what was that one? Sorry, Jan, sorry.
I very much support this. It's there's been lots of discussion, planning over a number of years for this development, and there have been issues in terms of ambition because of recent rising prices and construction costs and so on, and so it's been reviewed, looked at again, so that there's a long-term plan for this is the first stage, and then there'll hopefully be a further stage later on. But this has been very much supported by the local community, with quite a number of questions about its suitability, location, sustainability, and so on. But generally has a lot of local support.
Okay. Just for move to recommendation under risk 7.6, you've already referred to this, George, to the council. Because of the seal receipt situation, responsibility ultimately goes back to the parish council or an entity and not a business. There actually is zero risk really to the council. So clearly overview and Scrutiny has no issue with that. So recommendations, 9.1, 9.2 and 9.3. Oh, Sue, missed you, sorry.
Just a quick question. I'm just wondering whereabouts in Brundall this is and whether it's easily accessible.
George or Yang?
It's an excellent question. So I don't know the area particularly well. So I'll hand over to the council.
Yes, it's quite easily accessible. In fact, the site is currently used by junior football club. Only it's an extended site because of land being made available through local development, and so clearly access has been looked at, and it will be accessible for people of Brundall, Blowfield, without having to travel by car necessarily, which has been an issue that has been discussed to some degree. And so it's linking in with ongoing developments, which we're certainly a parish council are keen to see cycleway access, footpaths, because currently there's limited access in that sense, certainly road access, but it's a case of ensuring that there's sustainable transport options such as cycleways and footpaths, which can be included in the local developments, housing developments.
Just to clarify, then it's not on the site of the existing community building and field.
No, sorry. So it's off Cucumber Lane roundabout, A47 Yarmouth Road, going towards Blowfield. So it's access off there, not directly off the A47, off the road that runs parallel to it, Yarmouth Road, going towards Blowfield from Cucumber Lane roundabout. If you know that area, I can't be more specific than that, and if that's okay.
I do know where you mean, actually. Thank you, Jan. It's nice to see the council so comprehensively engaged within their community. Thanks. So you actually put your hand up very late now, Craig. So I'm not going to allow you in. No, I am. Go on. Oh, I see. Right. Well, my spotters here didn't. Well, I have to say my spotters here didn't spot you earlier, only later. But go on, Greg.
Just a quick question. I can't. I may have missed it. Has this got planning permission yet?
Yes, it has.
It has. Because look at it, it tells a nice story, but I can't see any. Talk about sustainability, but there's nothing about solar panels on the roof or any sort of eco element to this building. It's a bit strange if we're going to lend them the money.
Hold on, Ian. Hold on, George.
So we've not been involved in economic growth. We've not been involved directly with the scheme. We're about providing the funding to allow the scheme to occur before the growth happens. I'm happy to defer to councillor if you'd like, but
thank you. Well, see, George. So now, Jan, you can actually answer Greg over there.
Sorry, so I'll refer you to paragraph 4.3. Phase 1 of the project will deliver a new multi-sport floodlit 3G pitch and associated community building. Certainly Brundall Parish Council are very concerned about ensuring energy efficiency, and the specific design has not been finalised yet because the funding is both design and construction. But I would be surprised if they don't look at the actual energy efficiency and energy production opportunities that this site affords. I certainly will be, yes.
Thanks. Just on this point, because it causes a hell of a lot of confusion back within parishes and residents as well, who think that the planning committee can direct in terms of solar panels, and you should have this, and new housing estates should have heat source pumps, and they can't because it comes under building regs and government legislation. So 6 years ago, the government did have proposals that would have legislated for, I think it was now, amount of houses been built since certainly about 280,000, I think, that would have had all of that, but it was withdrawn. So that is directly down to government positioning and not down to a planning committee. So we are where we are with it. It's down to the developer to do what they think best, what they can do. Yeah. If you remember, Greg, most of the actual times that you've called an application in, I've actually supported you, but I'm not quite sure I will anymore. But yeah, we must have some levity sometimes, Emma.
It's
so as I said,
contentious enough in here. Don't bring planning in.
So as I said, I'm not quite sure I will in the future, Greg. But anyway, so are we done? So on the recommendations, we're going to read them out. We've got 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, page 196. So I'm guessing you're going to propose this, yeah? Yes. Yes, you would. Seconded. Yes, lots of seconders. All those in favour of this worthy project? Yes. Thank you. George. Right, okay. Agenda item 18, exclusion of the press and public. Just my glasses. I move that press and public be excluded from the meeting, the remaining items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A, the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order of 2006, would be disclosed to them. I so move.